As educators in the Inland Empire region, working to create equitable, student-ready institutions, we know how critical it is to hear our students' voices, to understand their unique perspectives, aspirations, and lived experiences. If we genuinely listen and take brave and bold actions to transform our institutions, we will better serve our students and achieve equitable outcomes. In that spirit, let us open our convening today by hearing from some of our own Inland Empire students.
Hello, my name is Alicia Polino, and I'm a student at Varsity Community College. It is my second year here, and I'll be graduating this spring. Something that has helped me throughout my journey to succeed at this particular college is honestly all of the resources that my school offers, especially during the pandemic. My school has a produce market. It also has the Transfer and Career Center to help with transferring, and it also has something that I also take great advantage of, which is called the TSLC, which is the Tutor Center. And during this program, it helps students to get tutoring. They also do study groups, and it's just a great way to help with work that you might be struggling on. And through these resources, it has been a really nice transition from high school to college, and has just helped me, especially during the pandemic, to succeed and be a better student. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Austin Sparks, and I'm a student at Crafton Hills College. Something that has really helped me to succeed in college is the abundance of opportunities and the communication that Crafton Hills provides. God has been so good in allowing me to go to this college, and this college provides a various amount of opportunities ranging from EOPS to food pantry to the free college promise, which I'm actually involved in. Through these tough times, this college has been great with communication and making sure and checking in on their students to make sure they have everything they need, and I've enjoyed my time here at this college.
Hi, my name is Alyssa Lovett, and I'm a freshman at Victor Valley College. Something that has really helped me in college is the first year experience program. This program has helped me focus more on my educational goals, personal growth, and career success. This program has helped me focus on a plan to transfer to a four-year university, having proper presentation skills, and learning my new learning style, equipping me for my future job in the field.
Hello, my name is Samir Irfan. I'm a student at Norco College. One thing I wish my college did better is consistency and organization when registering for classes. I found the whole registration process quite difficult due to lack of organization of courses, like finding half semester classes or a list of classes that are even still available, all while having to switch between a web advisor and EduNav to register for a class.
Hello, my name is Irvine Escobar, and I'm a student at Moreno Valley College. One thing that I really wish my college did to better my college experience is to have more consistency within the counseling department, because it gets hard when you have different counselors telling you different things, and it just becomes hard when you're trying to create an educational plan or trying to figure out how much time you're going to be spending within the community college system.
My name is Vanessa Gonzalez, and I'm a student at Chaffey College. One thing that I would say that's been very helpful for me to be successful in college is utilizing the resources on campus, like the Supplemental Instruction program. And as a science major, I take courses that are typically challenging, so to have free tutoring available from a former student who's taken the course has given me a sense of comfort knowing that they've been in my shoes prior. And I've just learned so many things from these tutors, study techniques, test taking strategies, and overall just feeling a lot more confident. And they're a huge resource that's helped me be successful in college.
Hi, my name is Caitlin Levitt, and I'm a freshman at Victor Valley College. Something that has really helped me succeed in college is the first year experience program. Such a program offers advice and tips in personal future goals as well as career success. They also provide tutoring services and scholarships, opportunities, as well as book voucher funds. A personal thank you to Monica Record, as she has helped me and has been an amazing counselor to me this past year.
Hello there, my name is Brian Alvarez, and I'm a student from Mount Centennial College. Looking back on my time now, something that has helped me to succeed in college is the student center initiatives that have taken place to not only improve and enhance career exploration and preparation for our students, but also take into account policies and practices that serve as barriers for marginalized populations. In an effort to create a student learning environment that encourages innovation and creativity, these student center initiatives and staff have helped me become more connected and understood during my time at Mount Centennial College.
Well, that was pretty inspiring. Welcome, everybody, to the second Inland Empire Guided Pathways Summit. My name is Rob Johnstone. I'm the founder and president of the National Center for Inquiry and Improvement, and I have the honor of emceeing some of these main session events today. And I'm mostly going to get out of the way because we have an august, esteemed, and wise lineup for you this morning who are going to share their insights and experiences. I wish we were all at the Riverside Convention Center again, as we were 2 years ago in person, but the world has changed much since then. What has not changed is your commitment to your students and your communities. And I want to start today, as I do every session. I've done a lot of work in the last 15, 16 months around the country with colleges during the pandemic. And I always start by thanking you each individually for the efforts you have put in over the last 16 months. As in California, you have dealt with a triple pandemic around COVID-19, the correctly appropriate uprising around racial injustice that occurred in its peak last spring and is continuing on, and of course the wildfires that have affected California. It has not been an easy road for you. You have stuck with it. You, particularly in the Inland Empire, care deeply about your communities and serving the communities and the citizens in your communities. And I know that without your relatively heroic efforts and significant attention you've paid to serving your students over the last 16 months, that many of them would have suffered far more than they did. Lives have been lost, livelihoods have been lost. It is a sobering and humbling experience to have gone through what we have gone through over the last 16 months. I'll make this point at the end in a couple of times. Most of us on this call have gone through it with a sense of great retrospection and thinking about our students, but we've also done it from having living wage jobs. And so many students in our region and citizens in our region don't. And the role that you play as educators, and especially in the community college sector, has never been more important than it is right now. So I again want to personally thank you. Also some housekeeping. You all know that you are in Attendify right now. There are some ways you're really gonna navigate this as if you're in the lobby of the Riverside Convention Center. You can click the schedule button on the left side of Attendify. It will bring up your sessions. These general sessions are going to be of the webinar variety. The breakout sessions, the Ignite sessions, will be more like Zoom meetings. We'll give you some specifics on what that means. You have to open Zoom meetings to get into those. You also have a help desk, which is the exclamation point down the left side. You see the chat/activity feed on the right side. We'd love to have you posting your thoughts, your pictures, your questions. Later in this session, we're going to hear from both Eloy, Ortiz, Oakley, and Monica Lozano, and we will have a Q&A session after that. We'd love to I'll be watching the chat for your questions. I will be moderating that piece of it, and we will be back with you multiple times throughout the 2 days. We really appreciate you and your time and are really looking forward to the energy and the conversation as you design the next level of structures, systems, and policies that will serve your students, not only in general, but are particularly important for our communities of color who have been further left behind by that triple pandemic that we've all experienced in the last 16 months. So without any further ado, I'll hand it forward for more introductions, but from my heart, welcome and thank you for all that you do. And I look forward to the honor of being with you over the next 2 days. So next up, please.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Inland Empire Desert Guided Pathways Summit. I'm Anne-Marie Sakrikoff, the Chief Operations Officer for Growing Inland Achievement. We are so excited to have you here today. I first off would like to thank College Futures Foundation for all their continued support for the implementation of guided pathways in our region, and specifically for their support of this summit this year. Also want to give a huge shout out and thanks to the planning committee that worked tirelessly, volunteered their time in many, many hours to make sure that this summit is for all of you and is beneficial for your continued growth and work over the next year. We are so excited that they worked hard to make sure that all 12 community colleges are presenting and sharing through breakouts and workshops at this summit this year. It's very, very exciting. With that, I do want to share the theme that they developed: transforming student experiences, making sure that colleges improve the student experience through student engagement, racial equity, and data-driven practices. You will see this theme emphasized throughout the workshops and breakout sessions. through questions that each speaker has been asked to share at the end of their session. So they will be answering questions around improving the student experience, improving racial equity on your campus, how data plays a role in your efforts, and what role does student voice play, and why does that matter? In addition, making sure to share how they plan to continue to implement guided pathways in the future. With that, I want to also emphasize that at the end of each day, we will have campus team time. This will be a time to debrief with the team that you brought from your campus. And so in Attendify, you will see campus team time, and there is an individual Zoom link for each campus, as well as a Jamboard link that you will bring up in Attendify. If you're not familiar with Jamboard, it is a Google tool, and it allows you to add sticky notes to a whiteboard. We will be utilizing this for our debrief to really understand what you learned, what you still have questions on, and what your college will use to move forward. We hope that you will choose a speaker from your college to then share out with a full session immediately following with Rob emceeing. I'm really excited now to pass the mic on to the President and CEO of Growing Inland Achievement, Dr. Carlos Ayala.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I will continue. My name is Carlos Ayala. I am the President and CEO of Growing Inland Achievement. Growing Inland Achievement is a collective impact organization that works to achieve economic equity in the Inland Empire by engaging with all of you, the Inland Empire Educational Network. We research issues and opportunities, we resource innovations and solutions, and we connect diverse stakeholders to transform the Inland Empire through education. Our vision is that by 2035, San Bernardino and Riverside counties will be widely recognized for a well-educated workforce, thriving communities, and vibrant economy that creates prosperity for all. We have a tremendous task in front of us. If you were to list the 50 largest metropolitan areas in the United States by population, you know, New York, LA, Chicago, Dallas, Houston, etc., the Inland Empire region ranks 13th. Of those 50 largest metropolitan areas, we have the lowest percentage of adults with a post-secondary degree. We're at 29%. Oklahoma City, Memphis, Las Vegas, New Orleans, Detroit are all part of the top largest 50 metropolitan areas, yet their educational attainments are above that of the Inland Empire. Why? You could argue that it is the inequitable structures of education that have disproportionately impacted people of color, or the lack of social capital found in communities with generational poverty, or the low number of nonprofits in the region, or sparse philanthropic support, or the low percentage of high-paying jobs, or maybe the environmental degradation caused by our geography and the flow of people and goods in and out of our region, or that we are the forgotten help for LA, Orange, and San Diego counties, or that the cost-benefit analysis of a post-secondary degree or credential in the region doesn't make sense for some. But I would argue most powerfully that these factors are all interconnected, and that is the explanation of the why, these interconnected factors. So 6 years ago, education and nonprofit leaders in the Inland Empire joined arms and said, we cannot overcome our educational attainment challenges by working in silos. We must work collectively. And this is our regional proposition. Moreover, our regional proposition is supported by the facts that as a region, we share a workforce and economy, we share students, we share challenges, we share that most of our students attend local post-secondary institutions. So if we have so much in common, why not share and scale up our successes? Find ways to work collectively. The way forward relies on joining educators, business, community, and government to work collectively on our interconnected challenges. GIA's role is to take on those educational challenges via a collective impact approach. The collective impact approach asks us to bring together stakeholders, identify and prioritize challenges, create action plans to work on those, and tactics, and then complete those tactics, then rinse and repeat. GIA's role is to engage with you, the Inland Empire Educational Network, and amplify success. We exist, we're at your service. We're here to provide service to you. An example of this collective impact approach can be found in the upcoming dual enrollment initiatives that the network has asked us to engage in. We are partnering with the Inland Empire Community Foundation on dual enrollment policy matters. And this is going to set the stage for a regional dual enrollment initiative. If you want to learn more about that, there's a session today at 1:50. There's good news. The good news is that we know that transformation is achievable. We have the privilege at GIA to peek into campuses and districts and listen to students and staff and faculty and leaders and find out about the amazing hard-won successes that all of you are having. We can see the pockets of success scattered throughout the region. We need to scale those successes up by improving policies and by listening to our students and spread the learning from those successes across the entire region. During this conference, you will hear from all 12 campuses. They will describe effective transformations they have undertaken to improve success. We hope that you can learn from these and you'll be able to take these transformations and contextualize them for your campuses. Finally, I want you to consider 4 calls to action. The first call, I want you to think regionally and act regionally. Anne Marie, at the beginning of the session, talked about coming together at the end of the day and talking about what you learned, asking what you have questions about and thinking about the things that you might take to your campus. That's acting regionally. Another way to act regionally is to join our action network teams. These are collective impact committees that we host, that we use for creating tactical plans. You can help set the agenda and activate solutions. You can find out more about that at our website. The second call to action is to align workforce and education. Help break down the divide between career technical education and the liberal arts and sciences. You can start thinking about how your courses you teach or programs you run connect to students' long-term well-being that includes economic well-being. There's a workshop today at 11:20 that can give you some insights. The third call to action is take on equity. How do you operationalize equity? How do you take it on? Here's some ideas. 1, call for disaggregated data. When you're in meetings and you're looking at data, you're looking at student success or achievement, ask for that data to be disaggregated. A second thing you can do is actually select specific target groups. None of this universalism, I'm sure we'll hear more about this tomorrow, but this idea of identify a particular group that has been impacted and create policies that support them. So an example might be eradicate policies that disproportionately affect young Black men. Call out a group. Or you can join others in the development of an equity continuum. This is a formative equity tool that we're developing throughout the region, K-12 all the way up to 14 and 16. This is a formative equity tool, and there's a breakout session today at 12:30 that can give you some more information about that. finally, the last call to action and the place where I think that we will see the greatest successes, and we've already realized these successes, and you can find out more later, is to listen to our students. Find out ways to increase student leadership and raise the student voice. There are multiple student voice and leadership projects on the schedule. By listening to your students, you can find low cost and simple changes that you can make to improve student success. For example, you can hear about our colleagues at Crafton Hills about the bottom line tomorrow at 11:20, or you can hear from another group of presenters today at 12:20 about a student voice project where we're actively recruiting. I too, as Rob and Anne-Marie have said, want to thank you for all your hard work serving our students in the Inland Empire. Let us know how we can serve you. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce one of my board members and a regional educational leader with visions for transformation across the whole IE. It's my pleasure to introduce the Chancellor of the Riverside Community College District, Waldab Isaac. Chancellor Isaac.
Thank you, Carlos. Good morning, Inland Empire Guided Pathways Summit participants. This morning I have been given a rather difficult task of introducing a very well-known guest who needs absolutely no introduction. Indeed, he is one of us, our very own State Chancellor, who leads the world's largest community college system. It is my distinct honor to welcome Chancellor Eloy Ortiz Oakley to the 2021 Inland Empire Desert Guided Pathways Summit to set the stage by providing the opening remarks. Under Chancellor Oakley's leadership, the Guided Pathways framework has gained momentum as a national reform movement. In 2016, 20 California community colleges began to engage in the implementation process, and a year later, the state of California committed $150 million one-time investment to Guided Pathways, giving all 114 California community colleges the opportunity to begin implementing and scaling the Guided Pathways framework. Today's summit is a product of that initiative. Chancellor Oakley's leadership during this very difficult period of the pandemic has been exemplary as he continues to take major initiatives in addressing the health pandemic, the economic pandemic, and not least the social and racial pandemic. He knows firsthand how community colleges can transform lives. He himself is a product of the California community college system, having attended Golden West College before transferring to the University of California at Irvine, where he earned his bachelor's degree in environmental analysis and design and master's in business administration. From the mid-70s to the early 80s, he grew up in the Florence-Firestone area of South Los Angeles, a community of dense housing in bungalows, duplexes, triplexes, and the occasional ranch or Victorian-style homes. Located 6 miles south of downtown Los Angeles, South Central Los Angeles was plagued by high crime and dwindling job opportunities. Oakley said that the expectations of going to college for children from a Mexican-American family like his father was schooled in Mexico and his mother was a Mexican immigrant, were somewhere between slim and none. So he genuinely understands what each of our students are going through. A US Army veteran, his career in education began, like so many others, as an adjunct faculty member teaching in and around and coordinating the Environmental Technology Certificate Program at Golden West College, then as a manager of risk services at the Coast Community College District. Eventually, he was hired as the vice president of college services at Oxnard, and then moved as assistant superintendent, executive vice president of administrative services at the Long Beach Community College District. In 2007, Oakley was appointed Superintendent President of the Long Beach Community College District, one of the most diverse community colleges in the nation, and he became increasingly well known for providing statewide and national leadership on improving educational outcomes of historically underrepresented students. Oakley's trailblazing efforts of putting students first have been acknowledged through a number of state and national appointments. The James Irvine Foundation recognized him with its Leadership Award in 2014. The same year, he was appointed to the University of California Board of Regents. In 2015, President Obama launched the America's College Promise initiative that was modeled in part on the Long Beach College Promise, a program creating clear, structured pathways for students to move from high school to Long Beach Community College and on to California State at Long Beach. Since December of 2016, Oakley has served as the Chancellor of the California Community College District, which is highly appreciated by all of us. Chancellor Oakley is committed to ensuring future generation of learners a pathway forward through education, and his courageous and unwavering support to social justice and the elimination of all types of inequities is an inspiration to the entire California Community College system. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Chancellor Eloy Ortiz Oakley to provide his opening remarks to this summit. Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor Isaac. That's a wonderful introduction. Thank you for that. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you. Good morning. On behalf of the entire Chancellor's Office team and the Board of Governors, we are so very appreciative and proud of the work that you're doing in the Inland Empire. So this is exactly what the Vision for Success is all about. You all coming together, working on improving the educational landscape for your residents, your students, and putting a focus on your students' experience. I have to say, I've been introduced many, many times, and that is the first time that anybody has actually described the architecture of the homes in the neighborhood I grew up in. And Chancellor Isaac, you were right on. Those are exactly what the homes were. My home was a duplex, which my dad turned into a single family home. And so that brought back a lot of memories. In any case, again, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm going to keep my opening remarks short and to the point because I know you have a lot of great information ahead of you, a lot of great work ahead of you. And of course, behind me is somebody I very much admire who I can't wait to introduce. So let me begin by saying that the dialogue so far around raising the student voice, around listening to students, and the way this summit began with those student voices is exactly the way that I think we need to model as a state community college system, how we approach guided pathways, how we approach achieving the goals of the Vision for Success, how we approach the call to action, which we launched after the murder of George Floyd, and how we approach centering the work that we do in equity, centering the recovery from the pandemic with equity. And what you're doing here today is exactly what we mean by equity in the Chancellor's Office and what we designed the Vision for Success to be all about. So I couldn't be more proud of the work that you're doing. I couldn't be more supportive of the work that you're doing. I want to thank all the leaders, faculty, and staff of the colleges that serve the Inland Empire. These are amazing colleges doing amazing work. I see you as leaders in this space. We rely on you to be leaders, and we want to encourage you to continue to lead because you have the right message. you have the right anchor. We want to continue to leverage that. The student voice is so critically important to the way we move forward. Listening to the student experience and designing from there. I couldn't be more proud of the students that we have in the community colleges. They are the most resilient students in America. They are some of the most talented and resourceful students in America. We just have to find ways to give them the opportunity to demonstrate that talent. So what you're doing here today is critically important, not only to the future of the Inland Empire, but to the future of California, because without your success, California will not be successful. So we're relying on you to lead, and I can tell you that we will do everything possible to support your leadership. So thank you. I know we will get into more questions about how we move forward. There's lots going on. I can't, I can't end my remarks without thanking President Biden for highlighting the importance of community colleges yesterday in the American Families Act and other work that's happening in Washington, D.C. He is putting a clear focus on the importance of community colleges. So this is our moment. This is clearly our moment to shine and to lead, and I know that we will. So with that, I want to end my remarks again with a thank you, and I look forward to the conversation that we will have. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce somebody that is a friend, is a colleague, is a mentor, is somebody that I feel privileged to know and to work with. She is somebody who has shaped California policy. She has shaped dialogue, and through her leadership, she has really provided a guidepost for what it means to be an activist leader. She is the president and CEO of the College Futures Foundation, a foundation that I'm very familiar with, but a foundation that is actively engaging in conversations and support for diversity, equity, inclusion, and helping lift communities like the Inland Empire to ensure that they have the educational attainment necessary to lift everybody in the community. Before becoming president and CEO of the College Futures Foundation, she was the chair of the UC Board of Regents and a member of the UC Board of Regents. She was my chair on the UC Board of Regents. I was very proud of her leadership on the board. So without further ado, I could talk all day about her achievements, but I want her to come and give her remarks. Let me introduce Ms. Monica Lozano.
Thank you, Eloy. And I so appreciate being invited to participate in this summit. And Eloy, for your leadership, Carlos, for your amazing transformational leadership and vision, for the Growing Inland Achievement, and your words of welcome this morning were really meaningful. The focus on equity, on operationalizing equity, on bringing student voice, on inclusive economic growth for the Inland Empire, and this sort of collective impact work that you're doing. And I also want to appreciate all of the campus representatives that are part of this summit. Your dedication, your work on the ground, you are what makes this happen. And so we really very much appreciate you being here. Rob, you and your team for providing the technical advice to the Guided Pathways work that we're doing in California. So thank you all. I also want to acknowledge two people on the staff of College Futures. First, April Yee, who is our Senior Program Officer. And April, thank you. I'm sure you're watching. You worked so hard to put together the summit. April oversees our Guided Pathways portfolio for the entire state. And so thank you to April, and to Sean Whalen, who is our Program Director. And it was actually Sean who back in 2017 had the foresight to understand the power of Guided Pathways. And it was in that year, 2017, that we made our first investment, $2.5 million, nothing like the $150 million that Eloy could deploy, but $2.5 million that we hoped would serve to catalyze further investments in Guided Pathways work. And since then, we've had a number of other funder partners that have joined in this work. We have seen the success on the ground that Guided Pathways in its meaningful design has led to. And so it was just last June that our board authorized another 2.4 million to expand guided pathways across the state. And of course, Carlos, because of the wonderful regional work that you're doing here in the Inland Empire, we did make a significant investment to provide you with the resources to deepen that work here regionally. And so I really want to recognize how important it has been to take this kind of integrated, institution-wide approach that supports students from the point of entry all the way through to attainment, that provide those clear pathways, academically and career pathways, like we heard from the students this morning, that support these students in our community colleges in regions like the Inland Empire. And I cannot think of a more important time. I don't have to repeat what Rob said, what Eloy said, what Carlos said. This is a time like no other. And as campuses closed and they transitioned to distance learning and the sorts of pressures that this meant for students, for their families, for communities, it's clear that those institutions that had embraced guided pathways, well, not without all of the heartache and the difficulties that we understand, those institutions actually are showing signs of having been able to support their students in a more timely, a more impactful way. But we also know, as Eloy and others mentioned, it didn't take a pandemic to expose the inequities in our higher education system. We knew they were there. It exacerbated them, but it also required us to double down to do something about it. And so we worked closely with Eloy, his counterparts in the other systems, with Landia Jose, who is the governor's senior advisor for higher education, to actually create what is called a statewide recovery with equity report, which serves as a roadmap for higher education post-pandemic. And what's interesting about this report that was really built from the bottom up, that listened to students, that understood what were the student experiences and student needs and put those first. And out of this report comes 4 guiding principles. The first one is to foster inclusive institutions. The second is to streamline pathways to degrees. Third, to facilitate student transitions and to simplify supports for student stability. All 4 of these are so compatible with the work that you're doing at Guided Pathways. It's almost as if you, Guided Pathways leaders, were the ones that informed what is now a statewide blueprint for recovery with equity. So it is precisely this work that we need to invest in and to ensure that the focus on equity to and through all of the work that you're doing, the focus on student voice to and through all of the work that you're doing is exactly what we need to continue to invest in. And because we're California and because we're bold and audacious, we actually believe that Guided Pathways 2.0, with its operationalizing equity lens, can be a national model. So that is why we're here. That is why we invest in you, because we know that what you're doing in the Inland Empire has so much potential to demonstrate that it can be done. And I also want to recognize, Carlos, you mentioned this. Number 1, take a regional approach. We understand that. We believe in that. We know that you regionally know the conditions on the ground. You understand your students. You know what is necessary to build inclusive economic growth. And so we agree this work can't be done entirely at a statewide level. Work collectively, these impact models, like what you have at the GIA, think about how to really build from the bottom up and to be regional in your approaches. Just yesterday, I read a report that was issued by Karthik's shop at UC Riverside. And it talked about what is a growing innovation economy in the Inland Empire. It is not just warehousing and logistics and supply chain. There is a burgeoning innovation economy, but we know that for that to succeed, it requires an ecosystem. And the ecosystem is industry, it's workforce, and it's higher education. So to all those students that spoke early in this summit, we understand what your dreams, what your aspirations are. And it is this kind of regional approach and the guided pathways that we believe will facilitate it. So let me just, for a minute, very quickly, I want to pivot to College Futures and what we do. And you may not have noticed, but the summit actually has a symbol, an image. And the image is one of a cactus. And when I saw it, I really reflected on it. My family is also from Mexico. And for us, the cactus, the nopal, is a very meaningful national symbol. It represents two things, hope and endurance. And I think those two words precisely describe what we are doing. We do it hopefully, and how we do it with endurance. And College Futures has embraced 4 values that we believe are core to our work. The first one is equity. Hands down, we have to guide, everything that we do must be guided through a lens to advance equity. The second is community. Just like the work that you're doing here, everything we do has to be done in partnership. And so we do it with the Growing Inland Achievement. We do it with the community colleges. We do it in partnership with community-based organizations. But community, students, those are the voices that have to lead the work that we do. The third is courage. This work is not easy. Just as Eloy and others know, to demand more from a system, to demand change, transformational change from a system, means you are standing up against those structural barriers that have held us back for too long. So it takes courage. And we believe that courage is what's required. And finally, curiosity. That is the 4th value that drives the work of College Futures. We have to be enduring in our curiosity, to listen from the ground, to be shaped by what we're hearing, to be able to pivot, because what we thought we knew may change along the way as it's informed by student voice, by communities. So if we seek the kind of transformational change that we've talked about, what I call the 3 S's, change that is systemic, that is scalable, and that is sustainable. That requires hope, endurance. It requires an equity focus. It requires courage. It requires curiosity. It requires community. So that is why we're here today. We believe deeply that we need to operationalize equity and that we need to be led by student voice. Those are our 2 guiding principles in 2021 and beyond. So we are proud to be with you in this journey, in partnership with you. We share the same values, we share the same goals, and hope and optimism and endurance. That's what this is about. So let me turn it back over to Rob, who I think is going to lead us in some kind of a fireside chat.
All right. I wish if I'd known you were going to tee that up, Monica, I would have had a fire background behind me. But thank you so much, Monica, Eloy, Carlos, Whalen, Anne-Marie. You couldn't possibly have set up these 2 days any better. And I treasure the opportunity to be able to ask you some questions over the next couple of minutes, and we've asked folks to fire questions in the chat. I just want to tie together some things that you all said. I think a lot about what we've learned over the 10 years now of the Guided Pathways. Guided Pathways as a formal movement started in 2011 with completion by design in the states of North Carolina, Ohio, Texas, and Florida. I had the luxury of being involved in it from the get-go, along with a great group of national partners. And as it kind of moved around the country, it has taken many different forms, state-level projects, as we have in California, Student Success Center projects in other states, and individual college efforts. And the regional approach that we are all talking about so strongly here is one that we treasure. In California is a place where the regional approach is even more important. If you are in Nebraska, the regional approach doesn't matter as much because there's one community college in your area. In California, that is not the case. There are many community colleges, there are many choices, they are often disconnected. At its heart, Guided Pathways is a framework. It doesn't do anything by itself, right? You actually have to design in the things you want the framework to do. And I always go back to the Deming quote, right? Every system is perfectly designed to have the outcomes it has. And we have inherited a system in the higher education space in general and community colleges that was designed 800 years ago for the rich offspring of the ruling elite. It was designed, whether you believe, and by the way, I'm sure there is a significant amount of Eurocentric structural racism in the fact that you believe it was designed in Europe rather than North Africa or Asia, which also had the same things being evolving at the same time. But this model was not designed to be democratic. We hit a home run on the democratic design in the United States, primarily through the GI Bill and through the existence of community college. But the model, the system we use, is centuries old. And like you've all seen all of the data that tell us about all of the inequities that are built into that system. And the point I'm making from all this is if inequity has been built into a system, and you might argue it happened by osmosis, these were errors of omission, not errors of commission. Interesting debate, right? I think you could make strong cases on both sides. Net result being that we have a system that is incredibly inequitable. And the point is, if inequity has been built into systems that we designed, it can be redesigned to remove the inequities and to build anti-racist, equitable systems, structures, policies, and processes. But that is up to you, right? It is not up to some other magical organization. Someone else is not going to solve this problem. The one thing I will tell you NCII has learned in the last 10 years is that it's very hard. This is design work. You are designing new structures, systems, policies, and new student experiences, and you are centering equity and celebrating the lived experiences of your very diverse student populations, nowhere more diverse than in the Inland Empire in California. And we have to build systems and structures that go past the statements we all made last April. I always go, my phrase on this goes back, if I borrow from my good brother and friend, Michael Baston, the president of SUNY Rockland, who used to be at LaGuardia, who said, the statements are great. What do we need? Steps beyond statements. It is now our work to design in equity, to design in anti-racism into our approaches. This is not going to be easy. You are dismantling, as we just said, centuries of the system existing the way it has. And the community college system is decades. So it is going to take time. And it is going to take all of you and the great work you're already doing to redesign systems at scale for equity, and then do the things you need to do in targeted ways with affinity programs to elevate groups who have historically been marginalized and who have historically been designed against rather than for. So all of that is the backdrop against which we do this work. But my message is, think of this as design. And as I turn to Eloy and Monica, I want to first, Eloy, I'll turn to you. You called out what we've heard from DC. Last night was inspiring. There's never been more attention paid to community colleges than there is right now. Interestingly, by the way, that also happens in Republican administrations. I mean, it's not only a political thing, but for different reasons, which we could go into perhaps if we had time. But as you look to the messages coming out of DC with the new administration, how do we in the California community college system, but really in the Inland Empire specifically, capitalize on this notion that we are going to be critical race to recovery? So the question is, what does this mean for our planning? This new attention and an influx of probably energy, as well as some funding. How do we capitalize on that and build it into our overall goals to serve our students and our community? And Monica, I'll turn to you with the same question, but Eloy, if you could start us off.
Well, I think it opens a window of opportunity that we have to exploit, because that window will close very quickly in a matter of a year, maybe even months. But the attention now is on communities. The attention now is on working class families. The attention now is about a recovery with equity. Those all speak to the work that you're doing in the Inland Empire. So now is the time to really highlight the work that you're doing, to really show why the kind of investments that you're talking about, because it's not just the American Families Plan, it's the infrastructure plan, it's everything that's happening in the administration that is putting a focus on the kinds of challenges that the Inland Empire faces as a microcosm of what's happening across the country, and also the kind of support that will be, hopefully making its way in terms of resources. So we need to organize, we need to mobilize, we need to make sure those resources land in the Inland Empire, places like that, Central Valley, that are critical to the recovery and critical in a moment of time where we don't want to leave another generation of students behind after, another catastrophe. So I think all those speak to a moment of opportunity that we have to take advantage of.
Thanks, Eloy. Monica, please, on the same question, as you hear you've seen the wind shift over time, both within California and around the country. And I'm going to come back to you and ask about your industry experience in a second. But as you think about this from the lens of college futures and you personally, what you're hearing out of DC, what is your message to the colleges on how to build on that and elevate their work even further?
Yeah, so totally agree with Eloy's point about this being a moment in time. And I was thinking it wasn't just Clinton, it was also under President Obama, where there was a focus on the community colleges coming out of the 2008 financial crisis and the economic devastation that came with that. And realizing that not only was the recovery going to be dependent on a community college system that, really helped prepare individuals to re-enter the workforce, but how do you think about what are the skills that are necessary to re-enter into high wage, high growth jobs? And what we've been talking about, certainly, through College Futures, but also some of the work that we've done with both the Governor's Task Force for Recovery here in California, as well as the work that the higher education leaders are doing, is the connection between inclusive economic growth and the important role that community colleges play in terms of identifying what are those high wage, high growth industries and sectors, not where currently, people are employed, service sector, hospitality, et cetera, but where is there real opportunity? And how does the community college build towards what are employer demands in those industries? So thinking collectively between higher education, the economic development organizations, the workforce development organizations, and building regional plans that are done collectively and collaboratively so that when the money comes in, it's actually deployed in a way that doesn't just go to a college, but it goes to a college that is working to prepare individuals for those employment opportunities that provide economic and social mobility. And that's what I would build out, not just, the community colleges unto themselves, but the kind of work that GIA is doing, which actually takes a much more comprehensive and inclusive approach to economic opportunity.
Yeah, Monica and Eloy, great set of points. I have the luck to work on another project with a national foundation that is working on creating bridges to living wage jobs for Black and Latinx students, unabashedly, through the Bank of America Foundation. And one of the things there is really focusing in on cost of living wage programs that lead to cost of living wage jobs and careers, and how. And I'm a former institutional researcher, as many of you know, so I've been playing around with MZ data on that project and looking at regions, including, by the way, Riverside City College is one of those 21 colleges nationally that are part of that project. And looking at the inequities in where high wage occupations and low wage occupations are. We all know that's there, right? It's pretty striking. When you look at the demographic breakdowns of Black and Latinx students in business and finance, STEM, architecture, and the high paying healthcare occupations, and then you look at them in the support organizations. And I think the focus you're bringing, Monica, on what does a cost of living adjusted wage look like? Our friends from Georgetown say it's $35,000 at entry, $45,000 later in your career. Cost of living adjusted. And we know that California has a higher cost of living, even though the Inland Empire it's a little lower. So I think that, and by the way, some of that is also working with employers to have them be more anti-racist and more equitable in how they recruit and support our graduates. So, but the point, Monica, is you have to work at all parts of the spectrum. I love that point, right? And we need to be thinking about this regionally, which is another important part of it. So speaking of industry, Monica, you obviously come to philanthropy from a very successful career in a mix of education and industry. And I want to have you put on your business hat for a second. And what do you, as a former business leader, like what are some of your messages to higher education, specifically to community colleges, as we approach this post-pandemic economy? You referred to this a little bit in your answer to the last question, but what are some specific things in terms of skills and a foundation for our graduates to enter the workforce, whether it's directly or after transferring to four-year institutions? What are some of the things you think about as you think about where we are in 2021?
Yeah, it's a great question. And before I get to specific skills, let me just say that my business career was in Spanish language media. Our audience were primarily Spanish dominant families, primarily immigrant foreign born. They'd been in the country for on average 17 to 20 years, but had come from someplace else. And what we found is that a huge emphasis on education as a pathway to opportunity. This is one community that continues to believe in the value of higher education. And what became so apparent is that all of the institutional barriers that we know so well are true and need to be dealt with, but it is also very complicated for families to navigate post-secondary institutions. How do you make decisions? How do I learn about financial aid? What opportunities are available to me? These decisions are made in family units. They're not made by individuals. It is a communal decision. And colleges and universities don't do a very good job of engaging families. They think everybody is an entity unto themselves, and they deliver information. And we know that students require personalized experiences, and they should be getting information. But the decision to go to college is one that's made in community. And I can't overemphasize that enough. So that's just one thing that I would encourage colleges to think about, which is how do you engage not just with the applicant, but with those who are helping the applicant make a decision. And then as it relates to workforce, what's so interesting, and you know this, Rob and Eloy, is there is growing emphasis on technical competencies. Do I have a skill that will provide a job opportunity? But we're also looking for what some people call soft skills. Are you adaptable? Can you manage change? Are you flexible? Do you know how to work in community? Do you know how to work across teams? All of those qualities or attributes are just as important, which is why the experience that students have in college is not just about getting a certificate that says, yes, I can do X. It is an opportunity for you to actually interact with people that you may not know, that come from different experiences, that require you to think in terms of your own bias, your own practices, and to overcome them. So I think it's a combination of both. And, there's, as I always say, there is no more important asset to an institution, to a company, than its people. And you have to continue to invest in people. So I would urge employers to think about how to make their workplace a place of ongoing learning and development for their workforce as well.
Hey, Monica, I think there's so much we could unpack in there, the three of us, over the next half an hour like that. But thank you for all three of those kind of lenses to it. I mean, I have traveled the country, worked with near 500 colleges in the last 20 years. And one of the most ridiculous things I hear from colleges and from people at colleges are that communities, the families of communities of color undervalue education. When in my experience, it is literally the exact opposite. Like you talk about, I don't know if that's an implicit bias, an explicit bias. Someone needs to give me the language for that. It pisses me off when I hear it, because in my experience growing up in communities of color and working with colleges, it is exactly as you described, Mike, that the families understand the value, but we need to help them further understand the value proposition of higher education, and then create bridges for the families to understand what the investment is of time and resources and what students are going to get on the back end. And it is that other point of yours, that these are family decisions. And this is where I think we can't be afraid of differences between communities. That is absolutely true in the Latin community than it is more in any other community. So let's embrace that asset and figure out how to address those concerns and challenges and break down the barriers to entry. And on the other front, you were talking about, Monica, what people often call soft skills. I've been using a lot more. My good friend Diego Navarro, who founded the Academy for College Excellence, which many of you know, in California, up in Watsonville, calls them as 21st century professional skills, right? They are the things that our students need to be success ready as they enter career. And another one of those false dichotomies we have in higher education, 9 is about CTE versus transfer. I mean, Carlos called it out earlier. All of your students want living wage jobs and careers, whether they're transferring first or not. So I think this point you're making about how do we work with industry? What are these 21st century skills? And for my social science and humanities friends, I'm a social psychologist, this is your chance to continue to not only be relevant, but to grow your importance as this more balanced set of skills that Monica talked about is an important part of what helps people be successful in industry. If we have time later, we can unpack the micro-badging credentialing thing, because historically that has led to a lot of racism rather than combating racism and inequity. Not to say that there aren't ways to do it that are authentic and combating inequity. So thank you for all of that, Monica. Eloy, anything you want to respond to there? You want me to kind of go to the next step? Because there was a lot, Monica shared a lot there.
No, I think I cannot add any more value to what Monica said.
All right. Well, then, Eloy, you and I talked. I actually, it was great that I think in your introduction, Carlos reminded me, or Wilda reminded me when it was. But you and I had a chance to meet a long time ago when you were still at Long Beach around that Irvine Leadership Award. And we talked then about the innovation. You guys had done some amazing things around the Long Beach Promise. You had done some things at scale that other colleges hadn't done. You had bucked against some systems. And under this umbrella of innovation at scale, the journey for you has been long since then. You and I couldn't remember what year it was within 2 years. But I'm just curious about your reflections now with the lens you have, the scope, the scale around innovation collectively in the community college system, and then specifically at the college level. What are some things you know now that you didn't know then, back in 2014?
Well, fortunately, what I didn't know then is how long it takes innovation to roll out, or else I may have not pursued it at the time. But as I think back, I mean, the award that you spoke about, the recognition from the Irvine Foundation, which was a big supporter of the work we were doing in Long Beach, and remains a supporter. Very grateful to the Irvine Foundation. Was around dismantling standardized placement exams and developing a multiple measures model of placement. And of course, my director of research at the time was Dr. John Hetz, who happens to be hanging out with me again in the Chancellor's office. When we did that, I assumed that by highlighting how standardized testing really undermined the future of students of color. I just assumed that the more that we talked about it, the more that we demonstrated it, the faster it would catch fire, and people would just naturally recognize that these tests were really undermining students of color. What I didn't know was how hard it would be to dismantle work that the College Board had done, the ACT have done. And look, I mean, there's a lot of well-meaning people. A lot of my friends sit on some of those boards, but these structures were embedded in the psyche of how we believe higher education should work. And it's very difficult to change that culture. It's very difficult to get it out of people's mind that just because we've been using these practices, these tests, does not mean that they were benefiting students. And it's taken a long time to unwind that. We're finally now starting to see people come to that realization. So innovation sometimes takes a lot of time and effort. Fortunately, we're finally starting to see the results of that.
Yeah, and there's a process, Eloy, that you got to where you were doing things specifically at Long Beach, and at that time there was not a lot of examples you could draw on around the country. There was emerging data from CCRC, which almost happened in parallel to what you guys were doing at Long Beach with my friend John Hetz and others. And I think those of us who come from the IR world, there's this notion that exists out there that the data will set you free, and it doesn't. Right, the data tells you what is and what was, but then and this goes back to the design point. You have to design the structures that are going to change it. And I think whether some people liked AB 705 or not, there is structural policy design that said we are going to do this differently. I just came off a meeting this morning with a college in an unnamed other state about the various levels of math and English reform. Like there's curricular reform, there's placement, and then there's like support around the courses. And what I told them, and I based it on California, like what you've learned is the time you spend fixing placement tests is, in the end, no one has ever made their outcomes 30 points better by changing cut scores, right? You can make your outcomes 30 points better by significant curricular reform and instructional support reform. So it's a great point. The data gets us to a certain point. Then we have to do the things we do to design in alternatives. And, I think building on that, we've learned that our systems are actually built to keep the status quo running, not to innovate at scale. So you have to uproot those systems to design and innovate at scale. So it's a great point. Monica, please.
Well, I was going to say, you can design and never implement. And I think what we've seen with Eloy, just talking about standardized tests at the UC, it took leadership. It took bold leadership, and it took, having enough individuals like Eloy who understood what the data was actually telling them to implement a policy change that, is now, we'll see the consequences of moving away from that. So it's both implementation, it's vision, and it's courage. It's the kind of leadership that, was demonstrated just recently here in California. So it takes time, Eloy, but don't give up.
That particular topic, I smiled a lot back in 2015 when Compass announced they were going away. And when a corporate partner who has made millions of dollars on the product that you are currently using tells you it's no longer going to be needed, that should have been a sign that they were seeing the future of where this was going. And by the way, I agree with you. There are good people who work there. They were trying to do a good thing. And by the way, it was not designed for what we ended up using it for, but that's a whole different, because it came from the ASVAB, if you want to go back to military industrial complex angle on this. So, but having said that, I mean, that's a lot to learn about innovation there in a short period of time, Monica. I couldn't agree more. Like, there's recognizing the problem, there's brainstorming and ideating about the problem, there's designing solutions at scale, but then there's implementation with fidelity. And I think of the quote, I think it's the former Prime Minister of India, who says, the acronym is FAIL, it's the first attempt in learning. Right, and we've not been set up to do that historically. We give something, like I have the death by pilot thing I always bring up. We give something limited time, limited numbers of students, say it doesn't work and move on. By move on, we go back to the same status quo. So you guys all in the Inland Empire, and Monica and Eloy from your foundation roles and from the leadership roles, are catalyzing the type of change that needs to be made to have these long-held systems that have been inequitable be unmasked, if you will, and evolved. For both of you, again, let's talk about the Inland Empire. This is a regional approach. Numerous people have called out how important that is. What is it about the Inland Empire that both of you think is particularly important, independent of how it serves the rest of California, and then as it relates to the rest of the state's change? So Monica, maybe you can start first. From a foundation standpoint, you guys have made different investments. Why was the Inland Empire such an important region for you?
Well, when you think about the regions in the state of California where, and Carlos laid this out so well, I can't, paraphrase him, but the population in the Inland Empire is very diverse and growing so. The educational achievement rates are, among the lowest in the state. And yet there is something really extraordinary that I have come to admire about the willingness to take on these challenges, to work collectively, to build these tables like the GIA, and to think regionally. Eloy and I have talked a lot about, higher education tends to be so siloed. So you devise solutions for the community colleges, the CSU is doing its own thing, and the UC's way over there. And we don't think about ways in which, students move through these pathways that very often are intersegmental. And they're also connected to industry, and they're also connected down to K-12. The work that they're doing in the Inland Empire is, it's universal in that sense. It's comprehensive. And so, yes, it's got its challenges, like so many regions in California, but it also has a willingness to accept them as challenges and work collectively to overcome them. And that's why we're so inspired by the leadership that we see out in the Inland Empire and want to make the kinds of investments that we talked about earlier.
Thanks, Monica. Eloy, you mentioned it a little earlier. Anything you'd like to add on this particular region?
Well, I just like to add briefly that for me, as I think about California, I've except for the 4 years I was in the military, this has been home. The Inland Empire is really, what California families are all about. You don't find that kind of, you don't find these families on the coast anymore. They've been moved because of the high cost of housing. Think about the Bay Area or the South Bay and the LA area. It's changed so much. Working families, the future of California is in places like the Inland Empire. So we have to be, if we care about the future of California, we have to care about what's happening in the Inland Empire and in the Central Valley. This is the future of California. So, for me and for my team, it's about the urgency of this moment. We have to make sure, Inland Empire is one of the 3 priority regions in the Vision for Success. And there's a reason for that, because we see that their success is the success of California.
Yeah, thanks, Eloy. And this regional approach, I've worked all over California. San Diego's got a mini version. Central Valley's got a version of it. But you guys always have had this more deeply committed sense of a regional approach. By the way, just as an observation, you've got staff in Leslie Valente and Helen Guevara who are helping you from the Foundation for California Community College. They've been wonderful partners in the work that we've done there already, and they will be on CAGP Phase 2 for those of you as we move to the Institute. So this regional approach is incredibly important and heartening to see, because I agree with both Eloy and Monica. You don't see it in a lot of places, right? Monica, something to add there? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we did some research at College Futures to try to understand what we call the capacity gap in California in post-secondary institutions. And so with growing populations and, where are the institutions that can serve, either high school students that are going into post-secondary, transfer students coming out 2 years, adult learners who are returning. And what we found is that especially in the Inland Empire, because of the growing population, because it is working class families like Eloy mentioned, and yet you only have one UC and one CSU, and you've got all of these the 12 community colleges that are on this call, plus all the high schools that are feeding into the community colleges. And so you might say there's a capacity gap in the Inland Empire, but by taking the approach that they're taking, which is collaborative, that says, maybe I don't have enough seats at my CSU, but if I work with the independents, we can actually use some of their capacity to fill that void, or we can use the satellite campuses further out in the Coachella Valley and Palm Desert. So they are actually not only thinking regionally, they're planning and operating at a regional level, making sure that, you don't lose students just because, the CSU San Bernardino can't necessarily continue to grow enrollment. So it is that approach that is very innovative. You're talking about innovation earlier. These are the kinds of innovations that are going to be required from post-secondary if we're going to make it happen in California.
Great. I want to pull on a question from the chat here about, as we talk about soft skills or 21st professional skills, the question comes up of how do we incorporate the education of them into curriculum and learning? So this is really kind of a institutional and equitable learning outcome question. Any thoughts from either of you on, as you look through the curricula, where do we further emphasize the notion of 21st century professional skills? I have one idea in the back of my head, but first to the two of you as well. Monica says, no, I'm not doing it. Eloy, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think, continuing to make the curriculum relevant, both culturally relevant and relevant to what's going on in your community. And that should be informed by employers, by the nonprofit sector, by what's going on. We have to continue to give students the opportunity to demonstrate their skills, to work in teams, to work in their community. So both inside and outside the classroom, learning just doesn't happen in the classroom. Learning happens in student clubs, organizations, in creating opportunities outside the classroom for students to engage with employers. Learn and earn opportunities are critical to the future. We need to put students in those spaces so that they can learn from other people in that career field. So I think intentionally designing those opportunities is key.
Yeah, Courtney, who asked the question. You'll also hear more on this from Dr. Tia McNair tomorrow, who is from AAC&U, who has done a lot of work on what does it mean to be equitable in the classroom about some of these things. And I will also say that Bank of America Foundation project I work on, we have really strongly emphasized the things that Eloy mentioned here. You know, the phrase that comes out of AAC&U, all the research called these high impact practices, things like internships, peer learning, on-the-job learning, all of these things. And by the way, what does the research tell us? Who gets those experiences? Rich white students, right? Who doesn't get them? Students of color and low-income students that are the ones who would most benefit by them because of historically and systemically racist practices that left them without social capital and relationship capital that majority populations can draw on. That's not a deficit mindset. It's a reality of what the system has produced. And so these high-impact practices can help us make those connections. But again, you got to design them in. It doesn't happen by osmosis. We already know what happens by osmosis. It reifies the inequities that exist on the capital that's already there. I would also argue, along with Eloy, that those 21st professional skills exist in what we classically call Gen Ed courses. So my Gen Ed peers, colleagues, and friends, it is a responsibility of us to realize that I taught psychology. 90% of the students in my psychology class were not getting a psychology degree. And even of the ones who were getting a psychology degree, most of them weren't going to be PhDs in psychology. So let's get over ourselves a little bit and realize that what our students in our Gen Ed programs are actually doing is applying, or maybe at the moment not applying, these skill sets in the workplace. And so that is the notion. These 21st century professional skills have to be, we have to take ownership for them collectively, but also individually in faculty and classrooms saying, here's how this might be relevant to you in the workplace. I didn't teach Psych 1 that way 20 years ago. I should have, I didn't. But I should have thought more about where this was going to actually apply for our students, much more in their lives, and how we could build on the assets they bring to us in each of our kind of discipline approaches to things. Monica, please.
Am I allowed to ask a question?
Sure.
A question. You know, because yesterday, actually, Eloy, I was part of your Black Student Success Week at the community colleges. And one of the community college leaders actually talked about how his pathway to success was unfortunately because he learned the skills that allowed him to fit into a system that was fundamentally racist. And that is not the way in which we want to design. We want to actually create a system that allows for you to flourish regardless of your background and the norms that you bring with you. So as you think about these 21st century skills that you were just talking about building, it is so important to do that in a way to the point you just made about it being asset-based, as opposed to saying, this is what society says is important. This is how you need to show up. This is what you need to look like. This is how you need to talk to us. And so I don't know, maybe you can talk to that, Rob, about how do you do this in a way that is anti-racist?
Yeah, we have like 2 minutes, so that is a much bigger question than the 2 minutes we have. Thank you for dropping that on me, Monica. No, I think it's a great observation. And one of the answers is in way we have to work with employers. We have to work with employers so they do their part to make their onboarding and recruiting processes anti-racist and actually. But on our side, we have to build this in places where we know the students are with an asset mindset. And I go back to those Gen Ed areas. And by the way, Eartha Johnson, a colleague I get to work with at Barstow, put in the chat, like, let's not forget our CTE faculty have a lot of experience with embedding this already and figuring out what it, like, and I think I always go back to, I work on the Aspen Prize, and one of the winners, definitely an anomaly, not a diverse place, but Lake Area Technical Institute in Watertown, South Dakota, right? Not exactly Riverside County. What do we learn there? That you build backwards from the outcomes you're trying to produce. They have 27 degrees per program. You cannot go there, swim around, and try to figure yourself out. You go into one of the 27 degree programs. And by the way, they have an 82% completion rate. because they backward design everything. Now that's an anomaly. You get it's different, it's an outlier, but it's at one end of a spectrum where it's backward designed from what the students are going to need when they enter the workplace. And it's not just discipline skills. So I say leverage your CTE faculty who know a lot more about this. And then our gen ed faculty, we have so much expertise in sociology, in African American studies, in Latinx studies, in how we might build these teams together. I think the answer lies in what we're going to talk a lot more about. We're already doing it with some of you on the IADP7 project, but cross-functional design teams that leverage the expertise of others within the organization to help build anti-racist structures for our students, to elevate these things that we know can build on assets. We have to name them and we have to build them in. And then we, as Monica, you said earlier, we have to implement them. I want to give you each a chance for a final word. This has been amazingly, I think, helpful to the participants to have you share your wisdom and perspectives. Any final words of wisdom for our friends here, Monica and Eloy?
Words of wisdom come from Eloy. I was just going to say goodbye.
You've shared enough words of wisdom, Monica.
Yeah. The only thing I'd say is just a big thank you to the work that you all are doing. This is exactly what you need to be doing. You're talking about design here. You're talking about designing with the students squarely in mind. And as long as you keep doing that, the answers will come. And we're looking to you for the answers. Our goal in implementing guided pathways was to create a frame by which we all operate under the same frames, use similar language, use data in similar ways, to tease out the answers and to tease out what works. And so we're relying on you to inform us in the Chancellor's office about what works. So keep it up.
Thank you so much to both of you for spending your valuable time with us today and sharing your wisdom and insight. What a great way to start off this 2-day summit. I'll leave you all with one thought too. I've reflected recently on what 3 things we learned about community colleges during the pandemic, during this horrible time that we've all been wrestling with. And I think we all had these 3 things before the pandemic, but I would suggest elevating them as you think about how to move forward. The first is agency. We knew before we had these are our systems to design or redesign. They're not somebody else's systems. We have agency. You each have agency in building a system. But you also learned overnight 15 months ago, you had a lot more agency than you thought. Why? Because there were things you said you couldn't do for 20 years that you did in 2 days, right? I think of things like courses maybe they shouldn't all be online. The things that now we need to design what's optimal going forward. But you changed a lot of things. We can't do counseling online. Sure you can, and you did. Right? We can't do group counseling. Sure you can, and you did. We can't do anything without wet signatures. Well, turns out that thing we've been saying for 20 years, we've changed in 48 hours, right? So you've got far more agency than you know. Use it to be anti-racist and to build equity into your systems. The second is urgency. Man, we knew it was urgent to work on these things before, and then we learned more about what our students were actually going through as this pandemic hit, because their lives were bared further to us, and what the complications were, and where that things, we always talked about the digital divide, but it was somewhat ephemeral, I think, to most people who worked in higher ed. We found overnight how big of a deal that was. And it wasn't just a big deal because of the pandemic. And the hurt that our communities of color especially are in from an economic standpoint and a disinvestment standpoint in this country, we also learned was much worse than we thought overnight. So to me, take forward that sense of urgency you had in helping your students and doing all the things you did, and putting more Wi-Fi in the parking lots, and thinking about things from their lens and building things in to solve their problems and to create conditions where they can feed. And the final thing I leave you with is compassion. I think everyone who works in community colleges comes with a certain amount of compassion for our students. But I would also argue, as we all went through this, we're doing it now, we're on Zoom, we're in 3 platforms, we're not there in person. We've all been doing this for 15 months. We're emotionally exhausted. Someone's kid's going to run behind. Another person's dog is going to bark. We all do this from positions of immense privilege, where we have living wage jobs and careers. Our students don't often have that luxury, and they've been struggling with these very things for years, and they got worse for all of them now. So I hope that some of the things that we had historically that might not have been the most compassionate mindsets, the door closes to my classroom at 9 a.m. I don't care if you're in or not. Like, if you're not in, you're not in. Like, think of who that was weeding out. Was it weeding out people who had unlimited time and resources? Or was it identifying people who had to take the bus that was late that morning, or their child care provider didn't come? Those are the things that we have to have compassion for and build in. You can design with a sense of agency, a sense of urgency, and a sense of compassion, and make real this promise of more equitable approaches from your colleges. You're already doing amazing work. You're building on an amazing 15-month foundation of rapid change. And now the question is, how do you use these frameworks to move forward? So with that, we are at the end of our time. Again, great thanks to all of our speakers, Eloy, Monica, Carlos, Anne-Marie, and thanks to all of you for attending and being so present. And now the mechanics of going forward is all the rest of the day. I think of Attendify as your lobby for all of this, where you can look on the schedule. You see next we have a 10-minute break, and then you'll go into some short Ignite sessions. Click on that Ignite session button. It will open up the ability for you to go into specific sessions. You will need to open Zoom meetings. It won't be run from the main. The keynotes are the things that are run from this main session, so you'll need to open Zoom meetings as well. We will be back together next collectively for a session like this late this afternoon. But this is your hub, your lobby for the day. We're going to come back for lunch. We've got DJ Steve, who's going to inspire us throughout the day. And again, thank you for everything. Thank you for your time this morning. We look forward to speaking with you throughout the rest of the day. Anne-Marie, anything you want to say in final closing before we hand them off to a break?
Let's enjoy DJ Steve.
DJ Steve, take us away, my friend.